whenever it's the least, but.
Can I officially announce that the question and answer session has started?
Okay, great.
Shanti, please continue to facilitate and I'll help you when I think I can.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm going to head over to the chat where a number of questions have been posted, and I will just read them out loud one by one. This is a question from Charles Frankston, who says, it seems that MIST tools or MIST.tools might overlap with Jonathan Godfrey's Quattro. Any thoughts?
I think it's quite likely Quarto, Q-U-A-R-T-O, is trying to do what's right for data scientists. There will be people who have other tools, in the same way that we get forks and other major projects. One hopes that the best of all of these things comes back and gets folded in. We'll see what happens.
Great, thank you. Next one is a question for me. It's a two-part question. The first part is, I believe R Markdown and LaTeX use similar or maybe the same notation for math. Is it universal, or are there still multiple different ways, multiple different notation languages people are using for math?
No, Markdown in all its variants uses simple tech. You can't use every tech command that comes from additional packages, but I'm pretty confident that everything that's, for example, in the AMS set of packages is within the scope of Markdown.
Mm-hmm.
If you had more complicated stuff you wanted to do in mathematics, you probably wouldn't be relying on a Markdown environment too heavily. But certainly for all of your Greek and your mathematical structures that would get you through undergraduate mathematics programs, it's all there, yeah, and it's the same. So yes, the lessons that I picked up in learning tech 25 years ago are what someone would have to learn if they were picking up Markdown today for mathematical expressions. Jason's trying to come into.
So the exception here is interesting. If I remember correctly, ASCII doc uses ASCII math rather than a tech-derived notation for its mathematics. So anybody who's using that for any reason has a different notation to learn.
The second part of that question is specifically for Jonathan Godfrey, because I know that you are teaching students in mathematics. Do they have to relearn how they write math when you're introducing them to R?
You have to relearn. So I teach in statistics courses that have a moderate amount of mathematics in them. We certainly wouldn't expect them to go through a full mathematical proof, for example, in this era. Part of that is because the way that we are doing assessments now means that it's too easy for students to just go and copy and paste from someone else's work. So we don't ask the same questions that we would have 25 years ago under a closed examination, handwritten booklet kind of assessment exercise. So people in my discipline would be using mathematical expressions as a means of conveying information. And so the expressions end up being, relatively speaking, simpler than the expressions that they are given in their handouts. So the students don't have to do anything harder than they're already given.
So Shamsi, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in the question. R is essentially a programming language like syntax, right? It's just a specialized package for statistics. So, it would be as meaningful as asking, you use a different mathematical notation for Fortran.
In that sense, yes, but I interpret it as an R Markdown, not just R.
Yes, that makes more sense.
Here's the next question from Charles Frankston. A question for Jonathan Godfrey and perhaps the other blind users. Have you tried VS Code's accessibility features? And the link is provided in that chat question.
I have not, but I am aware that the Corto developers are using VS Code as one of their recommended environments. If I see someone else do that testing and convey their knowledge, that gives me hope that it's worth investing a bit of time to see if it's a better way of working. I'll do it, but I probably won't be the person to go and do that initial investigation just at the moment.
So I can pick that up and I can say, yes, I have investigated those because I was writing a paper in this area. And when you're writing a paper about it, you look at the options and you investigate so that you can say something well informed. And so, yes, I've looked at them. There was a bug for quite a long time whereby you couldn't use soft word wrap with a screen reader in VS Code. So that would make writing documents rather difficult unless you added an extension package to enable hard word wrap of lines, or you broke the lines manually. That bug has recently been fixed. So that's one impediment that's gone. I think it works reasonably with screen readers, but I mean, it's not my choice of editor, but there is an ongoing accessibility effort. There do seem to be audio cues available in some circumstances. So for example, if you collapse and expand parts of a document, it will give you a sound to indicate what's going on. So yes, there is an accessibility effort. It does seem to be working. But I haven't looked at, for instance, the tech environment and whether there might be any specific issues with that or with their markdown editing capability. I haven't gone into that level of depth because, as I said, it's not my preferred editor. But in any case, yes, it does seem to be progressing in the right direction. And that bug fix is important because I think that would make it really difficult to write any kind of paragraph style document if you can't, where every line was treated as a single logical line. Every paragraph would be treated as a single logical line for purposes of the screen reader, and that makes it very difficult. So I'm glad that one's fixed, and we'll see what further improvements they decide to make.
Yeah, I would say, to the extent that I know about it, it's really with for blind people learning Python, and for that it seems actually quite transformative, just because there may be better or more effective editors. Like, I don't know, Jason, if you're on Emacs Speak, but that's an amazing editor for people who are already highly technical.
Right, I use Emacs Speak quite a lot, and yes, I mean the Python support there is excellent. So,
but it's very, it's just an incredible learning. Like Emacs Speak specifically is an incredible learning curve, and then some other ones that people still use, like F# are kind of not as well supported. So I would say, yeah, I think it's been pretty transformative for blind people to sit down and learn programming, to have an editor. And the important thing is that it's the kind of also the editor that, like, say, if someone's in college, their professors are probably telling them to use VS Code. So it's nice for them to be able. It's nice for blind people who are learning Python or getting technical for the first time to have something that they can learn on that is not just some other strange thing that no one else is using. And later when they become more technical, they can perhaps switch over to something like Emacs Speak or something like that. Maybe not. But like it is. I think it's been a bit of a game changer actually.
Sorry, should I just quickly jump in as well? I've used VS Code quite extensively, not so much for my R programming, but for C++ programming that I'm required to do. And I believe that, as you guys have said, a lot of what I would term proper programmers are now moving towards VS Code, and the accessibility push at Microsoft is quite considerable, I would say. The one thing that's held me back from investigating using R and thereby R Markdown potentially in VS Code is there's been a bug with the integrated terminal, but that's about to be fixed any day now. So I know that Juyang Seo, he's explored using R in VS Code quite extensively, and I've heard of a few other people doing the same as well. So I would agree that VS Code is a bit of a game changer. And the nice thing about it is, from my point of view, that a lot of my colleagues are moving towards using it as well now. So that's always helpful. So I'm probably going the other way, where I'm looking to move away from Emacs, simply because I'm the only person in the company that uses it.
So just to respond to Patrick's thing about moving on to something more technical from VS Code. VS Code is the thing technical people move to. And I was a long-time Emacs user since I participated in its invention. And I don't consider Emacs to be anywhere near the state of the art. I still have friends who use it, and it's like, you're still using that ancient thing?
I mean, I disagree, but I think a text editor discussion here might not be the most useful.
No, but it's I think I'm sorry, the person who's labeled as iPhone on my screen.
That's me. It's Robin.
Robin
Williams.
Yeah.
Rock Williams. Thank you.
Robin ROBIN.
Got it. Robin Williams. I think you got it correct, that it's an up and coming editor being adopted very widely in the community, and it's backed by a big company which has a big push for accessibility. And the big companies can afford to invest a lot in it. So I would say they're high hopes. But
yeah, I agree.
Just want to double check here, Jonathan. Fine, your hand appeared to be raised earlier. Did you want to interject with anything?
Oh, I just wanted to say that, thank you. I just wanted to say that I read the visually impaired programmers list, and they talk a lot about Visual Studio and how important it is for them to have it. And part of the benefit seems to be that it sort of integrates well with other tools, and it's got an ecosystem for packages, so that you can write a package that will implement the language features of a particular language, for example. So there is a tech package for VS Code. I haven't tried to use it. I did at one point start to learn VS Code, but I ran out of steam, and that was simply because I needed to understand better the experience that visually impaired programmers were having. So I think it's something that people who work in accessibility need to learn about, even if they don't use it themselves.
I haven't used the tech package either, but given that LaTeX is just text and the great accessibility of the editor, I'm sure it would be a nice experience.
I
think there's always going to be there's always going to be this little tightrope that that blind people working in a collaborative setting have to walk, about the benefits of doing it the same way as your sighted colleagues, in terms of how it is done versus doing it the way that works best for a blind person. We haven't closed that gap in the R community yet, because the R Studio integrated development environment is not accessible. We are using the same files, the same sort of mentality in terms of how we do things, but we are not using the same actual tool. And that's not really likely to change. But a blind person who was working in a community with RStudio users, like I am, isn't actually at that much of a disadvantage, because everything that RStudio is doing for the sighted users can be replicated outside of RStudio, one way or another. And it's making sure that the pain of the one way or another is minimized that becomes important.
And I should point out that obviously in my case, I don't write many collaborative manuscripts. They're mostly single authored by me. So that kind of environment that's different, and it obviously varies by discipline. So obviously in the sciences, having multiple authors is more customary, whereas in some other disciplines, it will be an individual person writing the manuscript and submitting it in the appropriate format to the journal. So yeah, there are different requirements in different kinds of environments, and we have to take that into account.
Let's move on to the next question. I think we have 20 minutes until the official end, but Jonathan Fine has just posted, we'll keep the room open and the recording on, and then you need a few minutes at the end to discuss some URLs to share with the group. Okay, so let's move on to this question from Bill Kasdorf. It's from the publishing world. He asks, if you are working exclusively, this is for Jonathan Godfrey, if you are working exclusively in HTML via R Markdown, does that mean you are writing math expressions in MathML? If so, are you aware of the MathML core development? And he provides a w3.org URL.
No, I'm writing all the mathematics expressions using very basic LaTeX notation, and I'm letting the pandoc processing provide the MathML or the MathJax and let it do all the work. I'm not interested in trying to unpick arcane structures. I want simplicity and effectiveness. I can switch between, using pandoc, we can switch between variants of mathematics being displayed in a web format, some of which I don't even understand why they still exist. But I'm seeing GladText, KText, MathJax, MathML, blah, blah, blah. I'm still just typing simple LaTeX and letting the machinery work it out.
That's a sensible answer. Thank you. The reason I ask is that at this point, most assistive technology wants MathML as a
or MathJax, yes. It's processing MathJax just fine.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be because the MathJax is inserting the MathML into the HTML page where the screen reader can get it. So yeah,
that's right.
And as to the question about MathML core and the MathML 4 specification, the rendering support for that was recently introduced into Chromium, and it's now available as a version 109 of all Chromium-derived browsers. And I did note in the changelog that there was some mention of accessibility API support for the MathML, and I don't know exactly what that means, but that's something worth noting. And I didn't get to it in my presentation, but there's an interesting mathematics project underway at the moment where Neil Seuther is implementing a new tool called MathCat that renders MathML using speech and Braille with a couple of different Braille codes and speech support for multiple languages. And it's a library written in Rust that could be easily integrated into a screen reader or a read aloud tool or any other kind of assistive technology. And so that and speech rule engine are basically your two interesting options at the moment, both maintained by experts in mathematics who are working on accessibility. And I think those are the going projects in that area currently.
Yes, MathCat is super significant and getting very, very high marks. And if this community knows George Kirscher, he has tested out the MathML implementation by Agalia in Chromium and says it's just super good in terms of rendering the math extremely well for a screen reader.
That's not surprising, and I should probably give that a try. I've certainly worked with MathCat, but I was collaborating with Neil Seufer on that at some point last year in helping him with some testing, not with anything else, just with testing and building the code and those kinds of things. So, and I did get it to compile for Linux. So as soon as someone writes the Python code to integrate that, the Orca screen reader will be able to get it, and Linux users will also have that benefit.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get through a couple more questions in the next 10 minutes. The next one is from Kaveh Bazargan. Let's see, I think it was Jason who had mentioned the benefits of including your underlying source. And Kaveh asks what source would be best.
So I suppose that one goes to me, does it?
Let's start with you.
So if it's a tech document, then you'd want the tech source files to be available. And the same if it's a Markdown or an ASCII doc or a doc book or whatever, based on the principle that tools for converting into different formats, including whatever the user's desired output format might be, are constantly improving. And so if you make those files available, then at least the user has the option of running their own conversion on them instead of relying on whatever you provide. Obviously, providing it is important. Provide the HTML with MathML or whatever is needed, but that link to the source is also important, I think, and valuable. There are interesting projects underway at the moment. So for instance, there's a project to generate embossed braille and tactile graphics automatically from marked up documents. And I went to a workshop regarding that project last year. And probably we would need to discuss that another time, but it's just another indication that the conversion technologies and the tools available are expanding and improving. And so having access to those original files is going to be valuable as a way of making sure that your documents continue to be accessible into the future and that the user can get their desired output from them.
And also just to add on to that this is one of the things we've one of the changes that has been made to the outputted HTML documents from the Jupyter notebooks that are used by scientists at Space Telescope is to add a link at the top of the document to the repository where the documents are stored, so that people can go find the actual notebooks and like play around with the code and so on. And I think that is really useful.
Yeah. Jonathan here, like the reproducible research movement is doing a lot for blind people without intending to do so much for blind people. I find myself able to grab other people's GitHub repos and reprocess their files so that I can get the benefits of my tools added into their book.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, because someone just asked me the other day, oh, how, you do data science work, how do you like read people's visualizations and so on? And it's like, well, I mean, there are kind of ways to do that, sort of, but the best way to do it is to go find their original data set if they've shared it, which they often haven't. But if they have, you can load their original data set into pandas or whatever, and just ask your own questions of the data, and use that paradigm instead of using a visual paradigm. And I think that's really, that people making the original data available, I mean, there's a million reasons they should be doing that anyway, but accessibility is also one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got more books available to me today than I have the time to read. And that's massive compared to when I was doing my PhD and there were no books available. You know, and you would scan documents and pray that you could read the paragraphs between the mathematical expressions.
Yeah, I haven't
And that
scanned
there
a
would be
book in like
enough in
3 years, and it feels amazing.
3? I haven't done it in 10. I found
Well,
a
I had to
scanner.
look. Yeah, I was doing some specialized stuff, but yes, you know, I mean, it definitely was trending down for a long time.
I found a scanner on the shelves in my office that I didn't even know I owned. You know, it had dust on it. It was just sitting there as
Nice
my
feeling.
backup scanner, and I'd got rid of my primary scanner and not gotten rid of the backup scanner on the shelf. And I didn't even remember it was there. It's so long since I've even remotely contemplated scanning a document. But the days, the pain and suffering of reading a document and inferring the detail are well and truly behind me. I'm so pleased that's the new world that the 18 to 25-year-old STEM student has today, that I dearly wish I had when it was my turn.
Jason, were you going to add on to that?
I was going to say, I haven't scanned anything for a long time either. The only printed material I get comes in the mail. And a phone can process that fairly easily and scan it. But for research purposes, the only things I've had to deal with on occasion are old papers which exist as images in PDF files, and you have to run OCR on them if you want to read them, and that's about as far as it goes.
I'm going to just jump down here a bit because Chris Pike asked a question that I think is a good follow-up and expansion on the last question about source. He asked, do you have any other recommendations or requests for publishers of technical documents to improve accessibility? That's a big question, but I think that'll be the last one that we can fit in before the last announcements.
If I could have source file availability without asking for it, that would be a massive step forwards. I get that in my own discipline because people are self-publishing or using public tools like GitHub rather than using traditional publishing houses. But if the traditional publishing houses gave access to the source files that created the HTML and PDFs for journal articles that I have access to through my library, I'd be a pig rolling in muck. I'd be really happy.
One thing I'd really like to say is like cut it out with the proprietary platforms. I mean, I don't think there's much chance of them doing that, but like every time someone makes people always have these bright ideas to like create their own web app or whatever that like a lot of textbooks are this way, you know, where it's the code and everything is built in together, and the publishers are like, great, it's a great it's a way to justify very high prices, and also a way to kind of lock people into it, and also to destroy like the secondary market in textbooks and stuff. So there's a lot of reasons they like it, but from an accessibility perspective, I think I've almost never encountered one of these proprietary publisher platforms that has been accessible. So I'd say getting them to standardize a little bit would be one start.
Well, remember, you're talking to the archive.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I appreciate the efforts in that direction from,
We can't speak for the rest of publishing, but we'll have a solution.
Let's hand the mic back over to Jonathan Fine, who wanted to end the second hour with sharing some URLs, I believe.
Okay, this being tremendous, and I've got a question for everybody, which is this. Well, this was fun. Should we do it again? Perhaps in April, and perhaps with different speakers, so that we broaden the scope. What do you say?
I would love that.
Sounds good to me.
Yes,
Good
this
to
has been very helpful.
I've picked up things from Patrick and Jason today. The idea of learning from someone else who's doing it works for me big time. It's a good format for learning new things, Jonathan.
Yeah, I agree.
Seeing
So
a
I
lot
think
of
I think the
thumbs up,
biggest
yeah.
question, the biggest thing that we have to recognize is that we actually often don't know what it is we don't know, so we don't know how to ask a question. And if we as blind adults don't invest in ourselves by attending or viewing later the recordings of things like this and following those email lists that we value, then those are the blind adults who are doing themselves a disservice.
That's excellent. I'll schedule a meeting and announce that there will be another meeting. The outcomes of this meeting, which are videos and text, will appear on the Tech Hour website on Saturday, I hope. And when I announce the Tech Hour in future, I'll say there's going to be a follow-up meeting in April. So we've got a nice big lead-up time to that meeting. Even though we don't know what it is, it's going to be something to do with accessibility, and the speakers will be people from the affected community. To close this, is something I picked up from radio, which is that people are often asked to choose some records and say why they're important to them. Well, I've asked the speakers to choose 2 URLs and explain why they're important. And the URLs will appear on the Tech Hour website afterwards. And I've made myself an honorary blind person, and that my 2 URLs are the Agile Manifesto, which is the Agile software movement, who favor individuals and interactions over process and tools, and they favor responding to change over following a plan. And then the other one, which is a big surprise to me, is the 2019 Nobel Prize for Economics. And there, the laureates had a new approach to fighting global poverty, and lack of accessibility is something I think that pushes people with disabilities into poverty. So we're in the business of fighting poverty, amongst other things. And their approach involves dividing the issue into smaller, more manageable ones, and looking at what works on those small scale things. So I'm going to stop now. The meeting finishes after the speakers have given their summings ups, but the room will stay open and the recording will stay open until there's need to, until we close them. So you can hang around afterwards if you want. And over to Patrick, Jonathan, and Jason to pip in and close up.
Shall we start with Jason?
Sorry, I thought someone else was going to be first. So I've given a reference to that paper of mine on markup languages and accessibility because it's germane to the topic. And there's also another paper of interest by Ashley Hsu on ableism, techno-ableism, and AI. And it's an interesting paper that discusses some of the challenges and misconceptions that occur when well-intentioned people who aren't deeply connected with the community of relevant people with disabilities try to solve the wrong problems and some of the issues associated with more subtle forms of prejudice and the way in which it manifests itself in technology. And I think it's a good paper. I cited it in one of my own publications, and I recommend it.
I guess I'll jump in for the second one. The two links I'll share here are one is the Wikipedia article for the social model of disability, which I think is a useful way to think about disability in like an advocacy context if you're trying to make social change, bring about social change. And then secondarily, I'm sharing the repository that where we're kind of doing the work that we're doing to make these scientific outputs at Space Telescope more accessible. And we're trying to do that in public to the extent possible. And we have kind of example notebooks and so on. And so we'll be doing that for the rest of the year as part of this grant, Astronomy Notebooks for All initiative. So thank you.
I provided a link to a repository where I just grabbed an old email chain where quite some time ago I reached out to the Blind Math email list and said, what is our gold standard for access and accessibility? And I offered up a gold standard of my own creation, informed by discussions on that email list, and sought feedback. And no one recommended any changes. And the gold standard basically says that true access to science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM subjects, and whatnot, comes when blind people are able to be the creators of knowledge, not just the consumers of knowledge. To be able to create knowledge, we have to be able to take data, analyze data, write up our findings, and communicate those with the intended audience. And we have to do so in a way that offers us the independence that means having confidence and the dignity of being a scientist, being a mathematician, being a professional. So to be able to create something independently means you have to also be able to verify what you've created, and that means consuming it. And I think the problem we have had in access discussions and accessibility is that the focus has far too often been on it's accessible if you can consume it. And I don't believe that that's good enough for blind people in general. And it's certainly not going to be good enough for a blind person who has ambitions of being successful in a STEM environment. So I only offered up one, but it has massive consequences for me. And I think it resonates with every blind person who is successful that I've ever shared it with. I haven't yet had anyone say, I disagree.
Here to that, Jonathan. And I know they can't do this for themselves, so I'm going to also say if we could give a round to Shamsi and Jonathan, Jonathan Fine, just for organizing this, and I know a lot of work went into that, and I know I appreciate it, and probably everyone else did. So
yeah, good stuff.
And I just wanted to say, Jonathan, Godfrey, and Jason, really interesting to hear the stuff that you're doing. Cordo sounds amazing, and I think it sounds like we had a very similar trajectory, Jason, from humanities to in a Unixy way to programming and data science and stuff. So
right, and obviously working on accessibility as well. Yeah, so
there were a couple of Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. Don't let me interrupt
Sorry,
you.
and by the way, Pandoc 3 just was released. I read the announcement this afternoon. There's a lengthy change list, and I noted some of it had to do with multi-part figures, so that might be of interest to some here.
I really love Pandoc. It's a great tool. It's amazing that it exists. And
It
also
is.
people who program in Haskell can say, point to something.
I wanted to mention for anybody who wants to stick around or can stick around, there were a couple more questions that we didn't get to in the chat. So we could continue with those if folks have the time and mental energy to keep going.
I have to run in 10, but I'd hang around for a while.
Cool. All right. Great. Why don't I just throw the next question out there? This is from Christopher Cameron, who asks, Markdown has fewer semantic tags than HTML. Do you think this presents an issue for using Markdown as the original format? I'm thinking of HTML tags like strong versus bold, abbreviation, keyboard, sample, output, code, etc.
I mean, I know you guys will probably defend Markdown on this anyway, but you typically in Markdown you can drop down to HTML if you have to. That's not, I don't think that's universal, but it's pretty close to it in most parsers and so on. So I think that's the general idea with Markdown, is that, you know, it wouldn't, if it did everything HTML did, it would be too much, and no one would be able to remember all the things, and it wouldn't be as readable. So maybe, you know, if you have to, you typically use HTML on most Markdown environments. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, I agree. It's true. But in the end, you've got to question why people want so many different semantic structures. I'm not sure if all of the semantic structures that are still in use are actually being as supported as people think they were in HTML5. But how many different semantic structures does a document actually need to make it interpretable and informative? It might make it more cosmetically appealing. But
there's this tension, Jonathan, between, in the cited world, let me gratuitously insult Shamsi here. We have these people called graphic designers who care a lot about the appearance of the document and often much less about the semantic content of the document. And there's a tension between these two in terms of rendering to computers. And frankly, it's the problem we're wrestling with at Archive right now. Is we have a 30-year history of people authoring LaTeX or plain text documents using every last feature of a Turing complete language, which means it can be arbitrarily complex in order to get a certain, look on a printed page. And even for sighted people, we read it more on the screen now than the printed page. So, my personal thing is I wish scientists would spend less time precisely formatting their documents and more time just worrying about the semantic content, and let us re-render it and reflow it and do things like that. But
if we lived in a semantic world, the div wouldn't exist, you know what I mean? Or the span, like those have no semantic meaning, but they're like by far, I would say, the most commonly occurring,
oh God, you
tags.
you see sites that are nothing but divs and spans at the top level. So that's the answer, and it's all cruft for visually impaired people.
It's fluff, and we are mostly immune to that fluff.
Well,
our screen readers aren't supporting the fluff.
You're immune if your tools are good, but if you have to read this in terms of raw text, it's piles of stuff to wait for your screen reader.
Yeah, if you hit tab and it hits 50 divs in a row for some random reason, then that's it becomes a problem.
But I think in the end, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I don't want to read source tech documents anymore. But our screen reader development hasn't supported all of the tags that exist that are in common usage. So we are increasingly immune as the screen reader development only goes for those things that are most common. Right?
Most of
So
the texts are not adding any meaning to the content, so
Yeah.
you're fine there.
And the screen reader can't deal with it, so it doesn't deal with it.
So,
The issue is if it fails to deal with some extraneous HTML tags for cosmetic purposes, does it chuck the baby out with the bathwater? Which is
Well,
what people who are using screen readers in MS Word are currently noticing. When people put text in a text box, the screen reader isn't handling it properly. And they don't even know that they're losing important material because the screen reader can't even tell them that they've just lost
because the flow is
pages of information.
Yeah.
So these are more reasons to avoid those final outcome formats like PDF, like MS Word, like PDF from MS Word, and get to the places where we know we are in full control. A text file.
Actually, Jonathan, PDF from MS Word, if the MS Word is properly structured, the
It's
PDF
pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. But the irony is that if text is in a text box in MS Word, the screen readers won't always pick it up. But when that same author converts that to PDF, it does.
I think the worst problem isn't people overusing the layout features of Word. I think it's rather underusing it. People who have never been trained to style their documents and use, the heading instead of just making it bold and 14 point and stuff like that.
They'll style it visually, but they won't put the semantic,
Exactly.
They won't make it a heading.
Exactly.
that's right. That's
Even
the
though the
problem.
features have been there in Word for a long time. I'm not saying Word's a great semantic editor, but it's at least decent for structuring documents and tables of contents and headings and things.
Well, I think the problem stems from the fact that when MS Word first came out, it didn't have those semantic structures. It came to those fairly late.
It had styles at the very beginning, but if you were of my age or my parents' age worse, you used it like a typewriter. And they know it. Almost everyone I knew who used Word 30 years ago used it like a typewriter, and they would position their elements by spacing them out or hitting the Enter key, to get where they
hit space twice because that's what you did on a typewriter. I remember my parents doing that. And
I retrained myself on that only 10 years ago to stop doing that.
But you didn't have 25 years ago in Word. You didn't have the heading buttons and the body text button.
Oh, the buttons. Well, it depends. I mean, you're talking.
You had the codes. you had the code. You had the You could. I remember the days of WordPerfect. And you would reveal codes to see what was going wrong with your format.
Are not the same. They had different philosophies.
Totally different philosophies. And as a WordPerfect user who revealed codes, I found coming across to HTML and LaTeX really easy, because WordPerfect actually forced the mentality of opening and closing brackets better.
But don't confuse even early Word from WordPerfect. Word's origins are actually from Bravo at Xerox PARC, which was a bitmap display that had headings and all of these things. But I think we're drifting a little bit afield.
But I think the use case and the end user behavior, rather than what technically was possible, is what has driven the culture of Word.
I find the younger generation doing better. And I mentor high school students. I mentor students on the robotics team. When they create documents, they're actually using headings. They're not just, making the font bold and larger and things like that.
But I think what's being presented.
The people who never trained on a typewriter.
Right. I think I'd call that improvement. I was just going to say, picking up on what Jonathan Godfrey was mentioning earlier. So when a browser creates the tree structure that is provided to assistive technologies, there are only some elements which are represented in that structure. There is a list of what the possibilities are, and that depends on the operating system. So necessarily
and the
what
browser.
any screen reader gets is restricted to like the list of roles and the list of properties that are supported in the accessibility interfaces.
Yes, which is why for years we had the no, don't look at that web page using Internet Explorer. You need to look at that web page using Firefox. You know, that was the advice we used to give to each other 10 to 20 years ago.
Now it's Chrome.
Okay, but we don't share that advice anywhere near as often as we used to. Because the actual browsers themselves and the way they interacted with screen readers was part of the problem for blind users.
So on this topic of focusing on content and encouraging authors to focus on content and semantic meaning rather than display features, the last question from the chat, it comes from Archive. So there was a suggestion made to us that I would love just to hear your take on. This is in context of Archive adding an HTML option to our abstracts pages. So you would be able to see the original text source or the PDF that's generated or HTML. That'll be the new option, HTML that's generated. And this was the suggestion that was made, that we add the ability for crowdsourcing image and chart descriptions, and that it could be added as a layer on top of the HTML, so it's clear that it's not author-generated content. And I would love to hear what folks think about that.
I mean, authors will tend to include alt text so rarely that I think, as long as it's not messing up, the original document in some way and it's held very separately, and that's very clear, because obviously you don't want to be editorializing what the author had intended or whatever, but I think that could be very useful. I mean, if people included alt text even 50% of the time, especially on charts and stuff, and I think people right now, are kind of backing off a lot of stuff because of like AI. They think AI is going to fix all these issues, and I'm a little pessimistic about that, but like
my AIML guy, for those of you who can't see Jonathan Young, just shook his head no.
Yeah, I know. But then people will always want to do this stuff technically, and I think technically is a not good, maybe not even adequate fallback, but it's nice to have it as a fallback. But if people kind of absolve, I think what that should never do is have people absolve themselves of the alt text, so I think any kind of solution doesn't involve the author, should make sure not to do that. But I think in general, it sounds like a good approach.
The interesting thing about Shamsi's question is, even if authors provide alt text, their alt text, especially for a graph or a chart, will probably just say this is a graph of. Whereas with this, crowdsourcing thing, you can invite people to actually like type in the data, perhaps, right? These are the numbers, or this is the height of the January bar, the February bar, the et cetera. And,
no one ever writes that. No one's ever like, it just shows a negative correlation to blah, blah. If they do, it's in the text, and then, but
right.
Sometimes you don't do that.
Right.
So years ago, in the 98, 99 sort of territory, I purchased a print book called something like Handbook for Writing in the Mathematical Sciences. And the guidance in that book that I really loved, and I'm willing to bet no one believes is happening, is that good authors in the mathematical sciences will say in prose what their equations and their figures and their tables ought to be conveying in terms of the headlines. And that people can then pick apart the detail, etc., for themselves if they want to. And the best papers that I've read do that. But if the authors have done that well in prose, many of the alt text offerings that I've seen start to become noise. But I see crowdsourcing as an exercise in pragmatism. I don't think it's the promised land at all.
Bear in mind, Jonathan, we're talking about this in the context of archive, where
Yes.
we have a community, a large community, but one that can appreciate the details, I think.
But I think the issue is how much of the detail do people actually read in every paper? And my PhD supervisor said to me once, 99% of people will read the title of your paper. 50% will read the abstract.
That's a whole other discussion, Godfrey.
Yes,
but I would posit that many people read the significant papers.
Yes. Yeah.
On the long tail, it's very significant but yes, any given chart probably will never be looked at, but like.
Yeah. So it's the amount of effort that goes in for what gain that we have to look at in the pragmatism stakes. And I'm not sure that crowdsourcing becomes, unless it's the people who are reading it, while you were here and given you read this paper, would you consider investing 5 minutes of your time to improve the access of this paper or one of these other papers that people who read this one also read? Right? So you direct the effort.
It would be more integrated than that. We're already planning when we start displaying our HTML papers to have essentially a right click for people to report rendering problems in the HTML, because the tools we have available to convert LaTeX to HTML now do not presently do that successfully. And LaTeX XML people we're working with said, well, if you can get us bug reports on a lot of these, we'll be able to fix them. So the first idea for crowdsourcing is crowdsourcing the bug reports. But now at the same right click, we can say, oh, would you like to, help us annotate this for visually impaired people or something like that? Very simple, right?
Agreed. I like the archive and other exercises don't have the human labor to manually inspect everything that comes across the system.
Exactly.
And so using the readers to tell you how you can go back and refactor something that someone else didn't pick up last year. So you get that rewind the clock, reproducibility becoming a really key element of how you can actually improve the quality of your product moving forwards and backwards.
Yes.
Is good. Is good investment. Yes. Yeah. Good investment. I don't know how much benefit you will get from crowdsourcing of people writing the alt text that they think blind people want. I look at some of the expert advice on writing alt text, and I positively cringe at some of that advice. We have advice that is extremely dated, and I'm not convinced that advice has always been generated or approved by the blind people that actually want the benefits that the advice is hoping to provide.
Jonathan, I have to run to our next meeting, but you can help us write our advice. There's the answer.
On